The Alachua County John Doe, identified as Ralph Tufano. In February 1979, an employee with the Florida Division of Forestry was doing a controlled burn off of County Road 236 near I-75. It was then that a man's skeletal remains were discovered under a tree in a wooded area near State Route 236. There was a noose found hanging above him. While the first implication is that it's by his own hand, it's impossible to know whether or not it was just set up to look that way or it's the truth. Far too much time has passed. In 1982, a forensic anthropologist reconstructed what the John Doe may have looked like. It was then they determined he was around 5'5" with blonde or red hair. They believed he was muscular, and they were able to tell he had healed fractures on both the left and right sides of his upper front ribs. In 2015, a 3D scan was done to recreate what he looked like with new technology. They also did isotope testing, which indicated he was not from the general area he was found in, or he hadn't been there very long. They believe he may have originated from the states north of Florida, perhaps Georgia or Alabama, or maybe even North Carolina, Tennessee, or Kentucky. There was some indication that it could have been Ohio or Indiana, with time spent in the West, perhaps Colorado, Washington, or Oregon. Isotope testing is just a guide, and often it's not very accurate. Although the lack of accuracy is maybe my opinion, it seems like a lot of times it's off. The DNA Doe Project had a rough time processing his DNA to get answers. They tried 3 times, but they didn't end up with a usable profile at all. Because his DNA was degraded, it was Authorim Labs that would have to come in. They have actually succeeded in a large number of cases where DNA was difficult to process. It's also very expensive to keep reprocessing DNA. The 4th funding attempt by the DNA Doe Project took place using crowdfunding, and it turns out this was one of the very first submitted to the DNA Doe Project to attempt solving. The project itself was formed in 2017, and in 2018 they solved their first case. Time after time, however, the DNA kept coming up as unusable. His remains had been laying outside for several years before they were found, and they were weathered by the sun. It's also noted that they had been handled by many people since 1979. They believe this also caused issues. Additionally, no hair was found. Thankfully, the 4th time was the charm, and they got their answer. And with that, Ralph Tufano again had his name. The DNA Doe Project was able to contact Teresa Narbut, who was Ralph Tufano's sister. She, in turn, got them in contact with his children, Maria and Renee. It turns out the girls were just children when their father disappeared. His disappearance happened in 1976. His adult children's DNA would officially give their father back his name. And now those children, who are likely in their 40s or 50s, hopefully found some peace knowing what happened to their father. Ralph Tufano was a missing person for 46 years, and an unidentified John Doe for 43. If he had lived, Ralph would be 80 years old today. Unidentified Doe, Eric Doe, also known as Huck, located in Boulder, Colorado. On December 27, 1998, in a remote location in Boulder Creek, California, remains were located on a remote mountain. In a case like this, we're usually talking about remains that had been there for a long time before somebody found them. But in this case, it was pretty quick. He'd only been there maybe 3 to 8 weeks. They believe he was 16 to 25 and around 5'6" to 5'8". If he was indeed 16 to 25 in 1998, this would mean his date of birth was possibly from 1973 to 1982. His hair was cut short, and he had a 5-inch ponytail in the back with beads woven into it. Unfortunately, enough time had gone by that he wasn't recognizable. They also noted he'd been beaten pretty badly, so they may not have been able to recognize him anyway. Someone had also stabbed him. It was noted he had opiates in his system. 1 year and 1 month later, in January of 1999, a tip came into the police from a young man. He said that a truck driver had picked him up and kept him chained inside the truck, a victim of SA. While he used the alias of Jeremy Coleman, this is where it gets a little convoluted because he appears to have suggested that he had abused himself another unnamed victim. So a victim victimized somebody else, essentially. Both were arrested, the truck driver and the man using the alias of Jeremy Coleman. The young man would eventually be identified as Jeremy Towner. Evidence was found in the man's home tying him to the death. Towner would be sentenced to life in prison in September 2021 for our John Doe's death. It came out that between November 10th to 15th, 1998, Towner drove himself, the victim, and the victim's girlfriend, whose name was Anna, to his friend Kimberly Labore's cabin. He had another friend, James Dotson, who was already there. Towner had gone there under the guise of picking up some of his belongings from the cabin. Towner knew the victim and his girlfriend, and the two had been hanging out in a group where most of the people were homeless. They knew him in that group as Huck, but they think his real name may have been Eric. Eric may have been from Florida as well. He was a drug user at the time of his death. They also believe he was homeless. Anna, along with a man named Mitch Russell, went to bed. It was then that they chose to take Huck's life. When Russell woke up, he was told Eric Doe had left. However, when they got back to town, Towner started bragging to Russell about how he and his friends had taken Eric's life. Labore and Dotson became concerned not out of guilt for what they'd done, but concern about getting caught. But it turns out that Towner had a big mouth, and they were concerned. They went on to threaten Towner and Russell, telling them to keep quiet. During his trial, Towner reportedly cried, "Man, I didn't want this guy to die." However, after his sentencing, he addressed the prosecutor, telling her, "I hope you feel satisfied. You just booked the wrong kid. I know it looks good for you to get all these convictions in the interest of justice and all that crap. What's important about the details surrounding the case is no one knows for sure how they knew Huck. Joseph Trigal is the truck driver that was holding Towner captive in his truck. Trigal was a bad guy, and he was on death row in 1971 when he was 23 for taking a life before. But then the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, and they let the guy out. And of course, he was free to hurt others once again. And he did. I'm skipping through some of the details because I am much more interested in the Doe, and at the same time, I don't want to leave out anything that might help identify him. No matter what Trigal did to Towner, it doesn't excuse what Towner did to Eric or Huck Doe. The people in this case are pretty awful. For instance, Kimberly Labore and James Dotson did not just take the life of our John Doe. They also took the life of Gaylord Chilcote, and he also deserves recognition because he mattered too. What I find really annoying and upsetting is Kimberly Labore claims it's not her fault that these men lost their lives. It was her addiction, and she had no choice. Governor Jerry Brown actually bought into this and reduced her sentence from 60 years down to 20. She came up for parole in 2019, and his niece said, "I am scared, not only for myself and my family, but for my community. It's really horrifying that someone who murdered 2 people could go free." Thankfully, she was denied parole. I tried to confirm Dotson was still in prison, but if he is, I couldn't find him. He was supposed to be serving life without parole in a high desert state prison. So just to reiterate, this man would have gone missing around 1998. He was around 5'6" to 5'8", and likely 16 to 25 years old, which means his date of birth was 1973 to 1982. And while he was found in Boulder, Colorado, it's not clear how long he'd been there, or how he met up with the people who took his life. Eric Doe, also known as Huck, has gone unidentified for 23 years. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. So if you enjoy the content here and you're not sure, take a peek to see if you're subscribed. Take care of yourselves and each other.